The tablet at the coffee counter asked me for 20% before I even touched my drink, spinning around with bright light and waiting while I froze for a second, realizing this pause had replaced the old habit of checking pockets for loose change. We used to drop $1 on the saucer and move on, yet now the machine arranges options in a tidy row starting higher than expected while the line behind silently watches, everyone understanding the choreography without speaking as the moment feels strangely formal. The screen presents its choices, the customer taps, and the transaction continues, though nothing about the prompts is legally required, which surprises people because the interface feels authoritative even though it is simply software guiding behavior with confident placement and timing rather than actual rules. Once you start noticing these screens, the pattern becomes unmistakable. Square, Toast, and Clover all turning tablets toward customers with preset amounts, making you analyze tip suggestions you never selected, while subtle design choices push decisions toward a narrow set of preferred outcomes. 18, 20, and 25% appear prominently, while the custom button waits off to the side and the no-tip option hides in a corner with reduced emphasis, creating an environment where declining feels discouraged even though the decision remains completely optional. The entire layout operates like a quiet nudge machine, not demanding or enforcing anything, but arranging choices so smoothly that many people barely notice how the design steers them, all while keeping the interaction efficient, predictable, and mostly unnoticed. Pressure grows because everything happens in public view, with the employee watching your hand move and the person behind observing your hesitation, turning what was once a private decision into a small performance displayed openly on a glowing tablet. The screen shows exact amounts instantly, removing mental math and making each option feel heavier than necessary, leading customers to assume the presets reflect a national custom, even though they simply mirror whatever settings the business or software designer previously selected. These numbers become norms only because they appear first, shaping expectations quietly while masking how much of tipping culture at the counter comes from design rather than long-standing practice, blurring the line between tradition and whatever the interface suggests. So the useful question isn't about generosity, but about understanding whether a prompt represents actual custom or just software nudging decisions, since table service carries separate expectations from counter service, self-serve stations, and quick transactions requiring little personal interaction. The difficulty is that tablets never distinguish between those contexts, presenting identical choices regardless of the situation, which creates confusion about appropriate amounts and leaves many people feeling uncertain about the right move despite nothing truly changing in etiquette. Which is why Section 1 closes with a straightforward promise that we will sort through the pressure, the etiquette, and the design choices together so you can make decisions calmly without second-guessing every tap during these quietly stressful moments. If you've stood at a counter recently, you already know the choreography, because the employee taps a few buttons, the tablet spins, and suddenly you're facing percentages you never asked for, creating a rushed moment that feels strangely performative, even if no one behind you seems impatient. It's the setup that generates the pressure because the bright screen, bold numbers, and quiet expectancy push you toward a quick choice, while the machine remains indifferent and the moment lands as mild stage lighting that quietly rewrote everyday interactions without anyone officially announcing the change. Now here's the part that matters, because table service in the United States still runs on familiar rules where someone takes your order, brings your food, checks on you, and closes the bill, keeping the usual 15 to 20% range stable despite all the new screens. That structure never changed simply because a tablet appeared at a sandwich counter, since counter service and self-serve setups remain optional and discretionary, meaning you break no rule by skipping a tip on a drip coffee or bottled drink when the interaction barely lasts a few seconds. The complication comes from the interface, because systems like Square, Toast, and Clover rely on preset percentages, quieter custom options, and subdued, no-tip buttons, shaping behavior by arranging choices so the defaults feel like the most reasonable path even when nothing is mandatory. This isn't entirely new, since diners once tucked suggested gratuity cards into checkbooks, but today's version is brighter, faster, and delivered directly into your hands, giving the numbers a strange authority that printed paper never carried, even though the psychology underneath remains basically identical. A percentage printed on paper feels like a reference point, while a glowing percentage feels like instruction, which is why these modern prompts often seem heavier than their paper ancestors despite functioning almost exactly the same way in shaping what people assume is the appropriate amount. Service fees add another wrinkle because they sit close to tipping screens yet behave differently, covering costs like credit card fees, wage adjustments, or kitchen rates, and unless explicitly stated, they rarely go to staff. So asking questions becomes simple due diligence rather than unnecessary friction. You're allowed to ask where a service fee goes and allowed to decide based on the answer, which reinforces the idea that practical awareness beats guesswork when the interface blends multiple charges into one neat display that isn't always clear about what money supports which part of the operation. The real skill isn't mastering etiquette, but recognizing cultural norms versus interface momentum. Because once you notice the machinery, the moment feels less personal, and the glowing buttons become another administrative step instead of a referendum on your character or your generosity. The screen still flips, and the numbers still glow while the line inches forward. But understanding the difference between long-standing expectations and interface-driven suggestions removes the unnecessary weight from deciding whether a quick transaction warrants a tip at all. When you can see how the system nudges behavior without demanding it, the choice becomes yours again, quiet and unhurried, and the entire moment shifts from pressure to simple navigation, leaving you with enough space to decide what genuinely fits the situation rather than what the screen implies. By the time you've watched enough of these checkout tablets spin toward you, the pattern behind the pressure becomes clearer, because the glowing numbers and preset percentages feel personal even though the software is simply placing options where designers expect the quickest response, not where etiquette truly lives. It helps to remember that nothing about this shift is unreasonable. It just arrived without explanation, creating moments where three bold percentages sit on a screen as if a committee agreed on them, even though the pressure you feel comes from presentation rather than any formal rulebook. Stepping back usually restores perspective because you've already handled bigger transitions like dial-up and self-checkout, and tipping only feels strange now because a decision that once came after a meal appears suddenly during a 30-second counter transaction. When that tablet flashes 18, 20, and 25% while your drink is still being prepared, the hesitation that rises is normal, since the system is pushing its defaults at you rather than testing your generosity or suggesting any cultural shift you've missed. Keeping a simple internal script helps steady the moment, especially for table service, where someone brings your food, checks in, and keeps things moving, because the familiar 15 to 20% still reflects the actual work done in front of you. Counter service operates on different expectations since the interaction ends once the item reaches your hand, meaning tipping is optional whether you choose a preset amount, toss $1 into a jar, or select no tip without needing to justify anything to anyone nearby. Recognizing when the pressure comes from the interface instead of the situation reshapes the experience, because those screens create a narrow window where you feel observed even though nothing meaningful hinges on which option you choose. Once you see the mechanics behind the moment, the tension eases, and a quick service counter becomes exactly what it has always been, regardless of how dramatic the tablet behaves or how prominently it displays its preferred percentages. If you want to tip, you tip, and if you don't, you don't, because the decision fits the context rather than the design choice made by someone who likely never stood in that same line watching people hesitate. This era works best when you walk beside the trend rather than fight it, allowing the tools to shift while you keep your own settings intact, choosing deliberately instead of reacting automatically to glowing buttons. The layouts will keep nudging, and the culture behind them will keep adjusting, yet clarity makes each decision feel smaller and less personal, leaving room for a steady approach instead of a pressured performance. You're still learning, still laughing, and still in it, moving through these digital moments with more ease than you probably give yourself credit for, which is enough for now as you head into whatever change shows up next.